difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Here with the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Friday. Today is September 11th, so never forget. After COVID and 190,000 deaths, I'm trying to remember what it was we were never to forget about attacks on American people. But maybe today we'll go through some of that, and we are delighted to have a special guest, and we'll introduce him in just a moment. This is someone we're welcoming back who's been here before. A delight. But let's get to first the introduction of Andy Kennedy, Princess of Denmark. Good morning, Princess.
Good morning.
Why Denmark? Why did you pick Denmark? No.
Ask me this. If I have any clue that's going on anywhere in the world.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Good to know for a news magazine program that Andy has no clue. We just wing it.
I'm the visual comic relief.
Yes, there you go. Faces for radio. So this morning we were catching up on some news. We got sidelined earlier in the week from a really important story that has been developing overseas, but here in the United States we get so over consumed with basically a slow rolling apocalypse that's happening in our country. So you've got most of California and Oregon on fire, and by the way, for those of you who didn't hear, it's a boy. So that's happening, as well as, you know, the effects of climate change in Colorado, all the way up with the snow, and here in Chicago we've had unseasonably cold and rain, and we'll have 80 degrees next week. So all of this is just on top of revelations from the Trump administration and a host of other things. So what you may have missed that is critically important to you, and we will explain it, why you should care. The Julian Assange case. This has been something that's been developing since he was seeking refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK, and then he was arrested. Now he's on trial for an extradition to the US. So in the US, we have this weird way of handling convicts and those in jail. So I'm in Illinois, and we had we're really good with putting our governors in jail. We've had 4 of the last 5 who went to jail. The last one was Rod Blagojevich, who was recently pardoned by President Trump. So he is now, and he spoke at the RNC convention. So Rod Blagojevich had been a Democrat. He went to jail for trying to sell Barack Obama's seat, or curry favors, or however you want to term it, but that's illegal. You're not supposed to do that.
Which is different than the norm, right? Because when you have a politician that retires from politics, typically they go on a book tour, right?
Yeah. So, are you talking about Rod after he got out of jail?
Well, sure. Like, I mean, it's different in Illinois, right? Because apparently you pick up that card that says "Go straight to jail, do not collect $200," right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then if you want to do a book tour, you basically have to be Brooksy in the Shawshank Redemption with the little card for the book.
Well, Rod managed to do it. I'm not sure how, but his team of supporters managed to get through to Trump, and he was pardoned. So that's interesting news. But welcome to Illinois and all this. I'm not gonna lie. I'm distracted by news that came out today of another Democrat who was just arrested. Involved in he's a DCF worker, and he was involved in neglect of a child who was murdered by his parents. So I've been waiting for that headline to hit for about 2 years. So this morning I got a bunch of people calling me saying that this gentleman has been arrested. So I'm doing happy dances this morning. Sometimes justice actually works. So let's get right into the Julian Assange case and introduce our wonderful guest today. As I said, he's been on our show before. This is Kevin, correct me if I butcher your name again. It's Kevin Gosztola?
You got it.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, good morning. So you are quickly getting acclaim on Twitter because you've got these amazing feeds of each day of the trial and trying to keep people updated on what's going on. And I feel for you because your timestamps on these are like 3 and 4 a.m. in the morning because you're following UK happenings and trying to get them out in a timely manner. So why is this so important to you to get up at 2, 3 in the morning to do this?
I've been covering this case since 2010 when it all started. I am just following everything to its conclusion, which I don't know when that's going to be, but I have obligation, I feel, to keep covering because this is basically how I got my start as a journalist. I was following, or I took an interest in the documents that were coming out. It seemed like an incredible development in news that there was this leaks organization that was claiming to have hundreds of thousands of classified documents that they were going to publish, and that they revealed things that I cared about. I mean, it's September 11th anniversary, so I won't hide that I've always been opposed to the way this was used and manipulated and exploited by politicians. I didn't support the wars that were justified. I didn't support rounding up people and bringing them to Guantanamo to hold them in indefinite detention when they weren't accused of any crimes. I don't really support using drones to kill people. I think the idea that we get to use the entire world as a battlefield without having official declarations of war in Congress is definitely a troubling development post 9/11. And these documents seem to shine a light on everything that had gone out of control after September 11th. And we had a window into the U.S. military. We had an unprecedented, we got to see the inner workings of the U.S. State Department and how diplomacy was run. And I don't think it was that defensible in many cases. There were a lot of things that I saw as examples of abuse. And certainly there are people in Arab countries who felt like the State Department were withholding evidence of corruption from them because there were in Tunisia and Egypt and Libya and other countries, we saw uprisings when they found out contents about what their governments were up to. And there's other examples.
Well, let's not forget the Podesta emails, John Podesta for the Hillary campaign, and you know the way that people talk to each other behind the scenes, particularly in politics. It came out that John Podesta was really dismissive of voters and voter segments, and just the way that he was engaging in political warfare was pretty shocking, I think, to most people. And he was, of course, working for the Hillary campaign. So this, do you think is, you know, here's WikiLeaks dumping all this information, and it's embarrassing politically for some really high-profile, influential people. In your mind, do you think that is what got the ball rolling, or was it something more? You know, like you said, this is the anniversary of September 11th. So was it something more strategic? And as the U.S. is arguing, that classified information put us at risk as part of this leak?
So the Podesta emails actually don't come up in this prosecution at all because they're not going after Julian Assange for those materials. They're really focused on a name that people might know, Chelsea Manning, and she was the U.S. Army private who was deployed to Baghdad, who decided to release these documents, well over 500,000 documents to WikiLeaks, and she had her own reasons. and ended up going through a court-martial, which I covered extensively, and was put in prison, sentenced to 35 years in prison for violating the Espionage Act. But then what we've never seen before is an escalation where you charge the publisher under that law. It's been threatened before. You can go back to Richard Nixon and find that there were journalists who were threatened for being a thorn in the side of Nixon, so to speak. Kind of like we have journalists that get under the skin of Donald Trump today. But they've never gone through and followed through with a prosecution against a journalist. So, I mean, you're asking, do I think the timing coincides with September 11th? I mean, he was indicted in April 2019, or he was arrested in April 2019, and we think as far as I know, the first charges against him started officially were entered in December 2017, and throughout 2018, it became clear that the Trump administration was really going to pursue this. So I think it has more to do with Donald Trump's larger war against the press, and the belief that they see an organization like Julian Assange, or they see in general the idea that a leaks organization could challenge the U.S. government as something that they have to stop. I think that's what Republicans would tell you in particular. If you're trying to figure out why, so to backtrack, Barack Obama's administration could have charged Julian Assange. We know that they considered it, but they decided to not go ahead and press charges because they figured out that, or they realized if they charged Julian Assange, then they might have to charge someone at the New York Times or at the Washington Post, because they did the exact same thing with the materials as WikiLeaks. They published them on the internet, and that raises First Amendment concerns and freedom of the press issues. And so they backed away and did not indict Julian Assange while Barack Obama was in office. But then Donald Trump came into office, and for people who are unaware, there was Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who hates leaks. He does not like leaks. This man was in favor of things like the SHIELD Act in Congress, which would have criminalized all leaks. He wanted a kind of official secrets law to be passed in the United States, which they do have in the United Kingdom, but we don't have that here. There isn't a law that just says journalists can be punished for publishing certain classified information. Most of the time, I mean, in 99% of cases, any information you get, you can publish. I mean, if I received it, I could publish it. The only thing they can really do is go after my source. I mean, it's been mostly the case throughout all of U.S. history that journalists don't go to jail for publishing material.
Okay, let me stop you right there, because this is where, to me, and I'm a little bit, okay, I'm old. So I remember very clearly 2006, where we had a very similar situation come up, and this was the confidential information that was released on a CIA operative. We know her now as Valerie Plame, and she was the spouse of a diplomat, an ambassador, and she was outed by Richard Armitage, who posed as an anonymous source and gave that information to Bob Novak, who was on CNN and Meet the Press. This was a really big time. So we have Bob Woodward out right now, and he was on Bob Woodward's level, but he was more on the conservative side. So he published the information that he got from this anonymous source, and it was classified information. So it wasn't just Valerie Plame, it was several other people who have been working undercover for the US government in either a CIA capacity or something similar. And it actually put lives at risk. It put relationships at risk between countries. But Bob Novak was never charged. And when I went back to look at the details of it, this quote really kind of stood out to me. And this is from Bob Novak. He wrote this in his column. So I'm going to put this up here. And Kevin, you won't be able to read it unless you're looking at it. So I'll read it to you and to the rest of our audience listening in. So Robert Novak wrote in his column, "My Role in the Valerie Plame Leak Story," September 6, 2006. He says, Special Prosecutor Patrick Fitzgerald, this was under the Bush administration, has informed my attorneys that after 2.5 years, his investigation of the CIA leak case concerning matters directly relating to me has been concluded. That frees me to reveal my role in the federal inquiry that, at the request of Fitzgerald, I have kept secret. I have cooperated in the investigation while trying to protect journalistic privileges under the First Amendment and shield sources who have not revealed themselves. I have been subpoenaed by and testified to a federal grand jury. Published reports that I took the Fifth Amendment and made a plea bargain with the prosecutors or was a prosecutorial target are all untrue. And what I found interesting comparing what's going on with Julian Assange and the arguments being made, which, you know, I do want you to get to on behalf of the US, is here was Bob Novak, who did the exact same thing and had a source from the government. So on one hand, you have Chelsea Manning, and then on this case, you have Armitage. It was not just Armitage, but Karl Rove. Karl Rove, who was very high-ranking within the Bush administration, provided this information classified to a journalist who went ahead and published it. And the journalist, in this case, Novak, said, I didn't know that Valerie and these other people were working undercover for the CIA. But the parallels in these two cases are just so striking. What is the U.S. argument against Assange in this case?
Well, so in an absolute legal sense, I would see little to no difference between what Novak did and what Julian Assange did, especially since neither works for the government. So they aren't under the same restrictions. So, you know, publishing this information doesn't mean that you can say they violated a non-disclosure agreement and they weren't supposed to publish. So that's the problem, I think, for the U.S. government, is that they're trying to enforce secrecy regulations against Julian Assange, and he never signed anything. You know, he never was enlisted in the U.S. Army. He never became personnel for a State Department embassy. He never signed anything to become an informant for the CIA or anything like that. He's not supposed, you know, there's no expectation, and there's really nothing under the law that you can do to say that he violated his oath. You know, like people have secrecy oaths in government that they're supposed to follow, but he's not, you know, you can't expect someone who's an Australian journalist who travels frequently and has taken up base in Iceland and, you know, been in Sweden and been in the UK. I mean, he has never spent any significant amount of time in the US, so it's hard to say that we can claim jurisdiction over Julian Assange and force him to follow our laws. And beyond that, I mean, I think the problem for the US prosecutors is that there are things that they're suggesting in their indictment against him. There's a lot of allegations in there, and they have a pretty wide range. But if we're just talking about publication, they lack the law in the United States to punish. I mean, so when you have an extradition case, one of the things that the judge is looking for is evidence that what is alleged is actually a crime in the United States or in the country where that person is to be extradited. So if the prosecutors can't prove that Julian Assange committed an offense in the United States, then he's unlikely to be extradited. And we've spent a lot of time focused on this idea that people in the cables had their names revealed, that informants were put at risk because they were not redacted by WikiLeaks. But we're having the wrong conversation if we talk about that for an extensive amount of time, because I may disagree with publishing those materials because U.S. military informants could be put at risk. But that is my judgment as someone who runs a news organization. That does not get to whether it is a lawful thing to do or not. It doesn't get to whether it's illegal or not. And it actually in the United States is not illegal to publish an informant's name in a newspaper. It's only illegal if you worked for the US government and you have that knowledge, and then you publish that CIA operative or that military informant's name.
Okay, I think that is a crucial point and I just want to expand on it so everybody who's watching understands. So, and we've talked about it here, Andy and I, and we've got another interview coming out about the military and like Snowden. The difference was when you're a government contractor or work for the federal government, you do sign away part of your rights, and you can be held up to a capital punishment for violating some of those things. But from a journalist standpoint, the reason why we protect our sources is so that we can get the news out. So if somebody like WikiLeaks or any journalist, you know, Kevin himself, if he is constantly publishing the names of his sources, his confidential sources, nobody's going to talk to him. And so this is part of where the check and balance is supposed to happen. This is why journalism is called the fourth branch of the government, because we're supposed to serve as the accountability piece. And this goes into the journalism code of ethics. You are accountable to the public. Can't do your job if you're constantly putting your sources out front and center. And I think that is the point that hinges on free speech, not just in this country, but around the world, in the Assange case. So we brought up the example of Bob Novak, who was not prosecuted, but now we have Assange. So you're watching this trial go down and the arguments from the U.S. Was there anything that stuck out for you? And what are we on, day 4 or 5 of the trial, this hearing?
Yeah. So just to be clear here, and I'm, you know, until this case, I'm about as unfamiliar with how an extradition would play out between the United States and the United Kingdom as anybody in the United States is. And I just want to make sure everyone understands that it's on the defense to basically prove that Julian should not be extradited to the United States. So part of this trial is them bringing evidence forward to a judge to convince her that she shouldn't authorize it. And if they don't come up with anything that's persuasive or convincing, then she's probably going to put her stamp of approval on the extradition. So the prosecutors don't present a case. They face defense witnesses, and then they'll do what you would normally see a defense attorney do during a trial, where they try to impeach or attack the credibility of defense witnesses, or they ask their own questions, where they try to promote their own prosecution, their own case. So they'll ask witnesses about elements of their case and try to see if those witnesses can come up with anything convincing to suggest that it isn't a criminal case. And you know, what we've seen so far is that the U.S. is very, very fixated on pretending like what WikiLeaks did was not journalism. And so what's important for the defense to be doing, and they have been for the last week, is to show that the way in which WikiLeaks operated was no different from any other journalist in the history of the news media. We hear a lot about how WikiLeaks was not a journalistic operation because they solicit leaks, because they asked people in government to give them documents. Well, in 2020, you might be interested to learn that there are over 70 news media organizations that have a system for accepting whistleblower submissions or materials from sources within the government. It's set up in a way that is supposed to help them keep their confidentiality or to remain anonymous so that they aren't retaliated against. And these organizations are places like The Guardian, New York Times, The Washington Post, USA Today, and in fact, there's this organization called the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And if you don't know that organization, it's okay, but you probably heard of the Panama Papers.
Yes.
Because it actually led to, I think it inspired a Netflix film, and it also, revealed a lot about the way rich, wealthy people were putting their money in offshore accounts to avoid paying taxes. And so they have a page on their own website that says, leak to us. It openly says, give us anything you have that might be sensitive. We will publish and do investigative journalism on it. And that is essentially what WikiLeaks started. When I was doing this back in 2010, it was not a normal standard thing. They were on the forefront of asking people to provide leaked documents that they could publish. But almost, I'd say if you're a reputable news organization now and you want to get Pulitzer Prizes and other awards, that you are now asking people in government to take the risk to give you documents and promising that you're going to keep them safe from prosecution, and you're going to go out of your way to try to protect those sources. And so that's one thing that's been criminalized. And then the other thing that they're trying to go after is the steps that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks maybe took to try and help Manning hide herself when she was on computers in the US government, because they themselves were trying to protect sources. So to me, I think it's kind of a troubling thing that some of what the government wants to target here are efforts to protect your source. And it's, we can talk about specific examples of how journalists have protected source in the past. If you go back to 20 or 30 years ago, it was, I'm going to call me from a payphone. Call me from a payphone. Right. So you aren't, meet me in a garage, hand me over the envelope of documents. And it seems now that there's that gray area that hasn't ever really been touched, that has sort of existed in between the law and in between what's legal and illegal. And now they're trying to define it even more clearly by criminalizing conduct that isn't on its face illegal.
You bring up an excellent point, because the cloak and dagger sort of activity with the phone book that you talk about, that just went digital. That's all it did. So me giving information to someone about how to properly encrypt, that is now being called into question. So in my capacity as a journalist, if I give that information to someone, is that now prosecutable? And that is why this case matters so much. And I think, the revelation that there are so many organizations, including the New York Times and all of these big illustrious papers, that are doing the exact same thing. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. You mentioned the Panama Papers. We saw the Podesta emails, all of these things that came out, not just from WikiLeaks, but from other groups. Isn't this really just about embarrassing the oligarchs and the wealthy?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So another part of the proceedings the past week was to have evidence brought forward that WikiLeaks documents, and I say it like that, they're really US documents, but those documents exposed torture. They exposed war crimes. They were used, for one example, this might be interesting to you. I wasn't fully aware of this, but there was a human rights attorney named Clive Stafford Smith who took the stand, and he represented individuals impacted by U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan, and they used documents from the diplomatic cables that were released, and they went to a court in Pakistan and convinced the court that what the United States was doing through CIA drone attacks was a war crime and that they needed to oppose it. And that litigation, the lawsuit there, he said, would not have been entirely possible without this information. And so we have that as evidence. We learned about secret black site prisons where people were being brought. That's much more well known now in 2020. We had a full Senate.
Which, by the way, Kevin, I don't know if you're aware of this. We have a black site here in Chicago.
Right. Yeah, we have a place where people are held incommunicado for lengths of time, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing, because all of this information seems like it's always out there. It's international. It doesn't affect us. No, Chicago has a black site, but we're not the only city that does. And if you talk to defense attorneys, which we do on this show, sometimes your client is just gone. They're just gone.
Yeah.
So
let's not forget about the whistleblowing of the DNC selection of the presidential candidate in 2016.
Yeah.
The whole thing is the differences between the Assange case and any of the other ones isn't a question of legality. It's a question of PR. Right?
Yeah.
That's all it's about. It's about embarrassing a government and the oligarchs that control that government and the politicians, and trying to put this. We're looking at why did we see, the Trump administration trying to change how the internet is controlled, right? This is all about controlling the information that gets to people. The last source of anonymity that people can turn to in order to stay safe from this kind of persecution, right? Like this is all connected.
It is connected, and they want people to believe that using encryption tools or privacy tools on the internet suggests that you're trying to hide something from the government. And I think, to some degree that might be true. Yes. Yeah. I want to be able to do this privately without you knowing. I mean, I'd like to just live my life like a normal U.S. citizen without you intruding in what I'm doing on a daily basis.
Well, absolutely. Even now we talk about Facebook and their currency that they're trying to have itself. Well, that is less about having a market in a crypto style currency and more about getting more information on the people that are in Facebook that they can sell to make more money. Right? This is all about control. It's all about controlling the information that gets out to people. It's always been about that, and it's just a different way of doing it now.
Right.
So one other thing that I wanted to point out, and this is a shout out to Trevor Tim. He's with the Freedom of the Press Foundation, and they are doing an amazing job. This goes back to the point again that this is not happening over there. It's happening here in the U.S. and Andy in Canada. They're tracking the number of abuses against journalists. So some of this came to light during the Black Lives Matter protests in Portland, Chicago, and other places where we saw, and as a small media outlet, we're used to seeing journalists getting targeted. But here we saw big outlets like CNN and everyone else just shocked that their journalists are live on air being shot with rubber bullets and tear gassed, and in some cases actually assaulted. So they were just shocked, but we see it all the time. So this group is actually tracking it. So to me, how do I not see the Julian Assange case as the pinnacle of targeting journalists when we see such a rash of this escalating day after day after day in this country where we're supposed to have protection for journalists and, free speech? So do you see it that way, or am I just being an alarmist here?
Well, the defense has placed it within the larger war on journalism that Trump is going after. And what you're referring to there with Trevor Tim, he was someone who testified during the hearing this last week, and he mentioned that over 2,000 times at least, the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker that his organization is a part of found that over 2,000 times Donald Trump has disparaged, attacked, or slandered journalists, that he has described them in multiple cases as enemies of the people. And he places that behavior by Donald Trump in the same bucket as this prosecution against Julian Assange, that it is part of that larger war on journalism. I will say that there were people who warned under Barack Obama that going after whistleblowers was going to develop into a war on journalists, because eventually, after you go after the sources, you might feel emboldened to go even farther in your effort to control information and go after journalists. And some of the cases that Obama's Justice Department prosecuted were from the Bush era, or they had begun the investigations into those people under President George W. Bush. So a lot of what we've seen happen in the last 20 years has been, we've seen this developing, and where we find ourselves now is that Julian Assange is the one that they are going to use as the test case for expanding their ability to control information. And I think this should be hugely alarming, not just to us here in the United States, but I think people around the world who are journalists internationally have to also be concerned, because it basically is the government taking, maybe you've heard of this thing of the world is a battlefield, where since 9/11, the US basically said, if terrorists are anywhere, if we feel like there's threats anywhere, we're just going to go there with all of our military equipment and our war toys, and we're going to set up shop. And we don't have to have authorization. We don't need permission from those places to be there. We're just going to start doing whatever, and trust us, there was a threat we had to take care of.
And the fact that there's a valuable commodity in the ground in those countries is purely coincidence.
It's coincidental. They're not after it. I promise you that they're not for that cobalt or the coltan in your iPhone or the
lithium.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. But now a similar thing is happening where it's, if the world is a battlefield, if you take that concept, they're basically saying we get to exercise authority over any journalist who publishes material that we think we need to fight. And so, it's Julian's the first person who is going to get all of the attention, but what's to stop them from going after someone in Europe who gets material, or someone in South America, or a part of the Middle East who obtains documents? I mean, what's to stop them from going after them next, because they managed to have a source who gave them classified US documents, and then they published them. And it all goes on the internet. It all goes on the same place. So, the one thing that I think we need to stand up against is this US government news speak, and I think it really is out of like 1984, which is why I use it in that way, which is that if you publish, that they go after these people and they say it's published on the internet, so you were aiding terrorist groups because terrorist groups are able to read it. Yeah, but I was able to read it. I'm a US citizen. I read it. So I got to read it, and obviously terrorist groups are using the same internet that I'm using. We're all on the same internet, but they focus on the fact that Bin Laden or someone from ISIS could read it, as if we're unimportant. It doesn't matter. The larger world doesn't get to read it. The fact that all groups have the same internet is a thing that they use to make it so it's evil to publish this information. But that's not how aiding groups works, in my opinion. I mean, if I directly gave the information to someone who was in a terrorist group and I didn't publish it on the internet, then yeah, I would be accused of a very, very serious crime. I would be accused of espionage, and I would be accused of aiding a terrorist group. But what they're doing is they're saying the simple publication of information on the internet is helping U.S. enemies, and so we need to stop you.
Well, what's interesting about that is that I'm such a cynic. I'm like, are they really talking about paywalls? Because if I put up a paywall, then, that's capitalism. So here's my question, and this is the giant elephant in the room. If this is so important, the way that we're expressing here, that it does have critical importance, why are the big guys so quiet on this? Why is CNN and the New York Times and all of these other publications, I don't feel like they are raising the alarm with it. Is it just us, or am I missing something?
No. So one thing I've said, though, is that I benefit from them being terrible on this, because a lot of people have read my work, and so very cynically don't necessarily want them to get in the game, because my journalism goes pretty far and wide because they don't find it that important. But then, to take your question seriously, which I think is a very fair question to ask, I think it goes to the fact that they just really don't like Julian Assange. And a lot of it comes down to a personal thing, unfortunately, within the business, and that they don't see him as a journalist. And one thing I noted before in my work is that the New York Times did these gymnastics to pretend like, oh, he wasn't really our partner, he was just the source. We just got documents from him. We weren't working together. We never were working together on this. And well, when he made his first contact with them, he wanted to be a partner, and he wasn't the source of the documents. The source of the documents was Chelsea Manning. So Julian Assange, the publisher, can't be the source. But I've seen media incorrectly describe Julian Assange because they don't want to see him for what he is, because he is a journalist. He has a union card for a media trade organization. He's a member of, I think it's IFJ, which is an International Federation of Journalists. And so he's a journalist. And yet, we'll hear things like he's the whistleblower. Well, no, he's not a whistleblower. He didn't work for these agencies, or he didn't work here. So you can't be the whistleblower if you weren't inside the government and had access to if you get the material from somebody else who's in government. And like, I don't consider myself a whistleblower if I were to get documents from someone. I'm publishing that material, and I didn't take as much risk as the person inside government. So that's the whistleblower. That's the person who has to be more concerned. I'm protected by law. That person in government isn't. So they're taking more risk than me. And so they just don't like Julian Assange. And also, like, you talk about embarrassment of the United States government. He embarrassed the U.S. media by publishing these documents. I mean, why weren't they doing this work? Why weren't they doing more to investigate how U.S. wars were going on? We heard evidence this past week about how all the materials on the Iraq and Afghanistan wars showed that U.S. officials were lying. I mean, even if you're supportive of those wars, they were lying about how well they were going. We're doing fine. We had victory already. We're on the path to. We're going to be able to withdraw in no time, and you'll see we're going to rebuild, and security is going to be great. No, I mean, both those countries fell apart totally from the U.S. presence. I mean, you look at Iraq, and you had this. You had ISIS come out of it, and then you look at Afghanistan, and we're going on 20 years that we've been there, and we've apparently we're so upset with how little we've accomplished that we're frantically searching for some acceptable agreement with the Taliban, who we've always been fighting, as a way to just get out. We've mostly given up, but we have to try to maintain some kind of reputation by not completely rolling over and conceding everything to the Taliban. But that's where we are, because we've done such a terrible job at that war.
Right. These are just so many critical points, and you're covering these, particularly on Twitter, but then also on your website, shadowproof.com. So people want to follow you on Twitter. How do they do that?
Oh, yeah. So I'm at Kevin Gosztola, Gosztola. And as you said, when we began the broadcast, that I've been up at 4 a.m. in the morning because of the time zone difference with the UK. Oh, and by the way, I'm doing it this way because of the global risk of COVID-19 that still exists around the world. And I do take that seriously, and I'm actually glad that I'm doing my reporting from the safety of my own home, and that the court has made it possible, because right now cases are actually spiking in the UK, so I don't really want to be there. And so you can go to that account, or you can go to shadowproof.com, where reports are being posted every day.
Perfect. This is wonderful. And thank you so much for joining us again. I just love the work that you're doing, and it keeps me from having to get up at 4 a.m. So this is where it's the collaborative piece of journalism, particularly from independent journalists that are getting this vital information out. So Andy, before we get out of here, do you have any last thoughts, comments for Kevin, or in general?
I just wanted to mention that now that Kevin has been on our show more than once, we can now refer to him as a friend of the show.
It's true.
Right? Right.
That is true. So, Kevin, I think we owe you at this point either a coffee mug or a T-shirt. So, probably the coffee mug will come in a little bit handier for you right now.
Especially at 4 a.m.
Maybe, though. I've been trying not to drink coffee because you crash. And, I've been waiting until after I'm done to have that first drink of coffee.
Good point. Good point. So we will continue to share the good work that you're doing across our network and push more people to it, because I think it is so vital. And we all need to better understand this. And I honestly think that you are right on when you said it's a personality thing, that the Mean Girls Club doesn't like Julian. So therefore, we're going to ignore these key pieces. And what is the old phrase, cut your nose off despite your face. And that is exactly what the New York Times, Washington Post, all of these publications are doing by marginalizing and minimizing what is going on with this particular case. So thank you, Kevin. Wonderful work. So with that, yeah, it's Friday. Let's get on with our weekend here. And Andy and I will be back on Monday. And I think Monday we're going to finish up part 3 on our series of the myth of the Latino voter. And we have amazing guests coming in. We have a personal witness statement, as well as a director of this documentary on Puerto Rico and the politics and policies that we see at play today. That is just so illuminating. And obviously in American schools, we don't teach any of this. So this will be...
This is a very close personal story for myself as well, because I've been to Puerto Rico a couple of times. I've talked to a lot of the local people, a couple of the politicians there, and followed closely how the U.S. has so horribly treated a part of their own country, inexplicably at times, and so it's kind of been like one of my pet peeves that requires change in the world, should we say? How it's even in terms of sports. It's unbelievable, the things. So we can touch on this on Monday when we talk to our special guests.
Yes, absolutely. And you'll see advertising coming out this weekend for that. And then on Tuesday, Joseph Brandon Johnson just wrapped up this amazing interview that he's going to show on Tuesday, more about whistleblowers in the military. So continuing those stories. So everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, and we appreciate your comments and all of your support here. If there's a subject that you want to see we have not covered, or more information about a subject we have covered, let us know. Drop a comment in the chat, and we see all of your comments here, so let us know. And have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Never thought we bout that, we in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Never the dog, we keeping it G.